At the beginning of the film we are shown several people who managed to survive the post-apocalyptic. Living in a primitive tribe without technology after a failed nuclear experiment in the past. At that time the remaining humans tried to avoid contact with some of the animals that could potentially transmit the disease. Because these animals can make their victims mutants. One day a man named Shafin was seen. Just came out of a place that had been designated by the chiefs as a hunting ground. And actually it had been forbidden by the chief of the tribe, but Shafin thought the chief was too much. But suddenly Shafin's father, Uri, catches him there and immediately scolds him because what Shafin does can harm the entire village. Then Shafin said that they continued to eat leaves and berries for days and that he planned to prove himself to be the best hunter in order to be elected chairman later. That's why Uri tried to give Shafin a chance. After that Shafin and his group went into the forest and found his friend Caleb. They were hunting animals. Now that they were far from the hunting grounds, Shafin's father wanted them to return immediately. But suddenly there was an animal sound there and made Uri allow them to go further to hunt him. And suddenly the animal appeared right in front of them. It looked like a mutated bear and was very scary. Uri then asked Shafin to lead the hunt and eventually with their cooperation managed to get the animal successfully disabled. Uri's father then said that the meat would be shared by Shafin and Caleb because thanks to them both the animal could be used as dinner. But suddenly there came a friend of theirs who had just returned from the forest and looked already infected. His friend asked that Shafin end his suffering, but Shafin could not bear to do so. But suddenly a spear coming from the direction of the forest instantly killed him at that very moment. It made Shafin very angry. This made them immediately return to the village, unaware that an unknown man named Amal was following them. Then came Shafin in the village. There he was greeted by his girlfriend named Doral, and praised him for his successful hunt. Caleb was jealous of that. And he was ridiculed by his sister named Miru. Miru said that she had no hope of approaching Doral. On the other side Uri is seen talking to the elders. Uri tries to convince them to immediately take his tribe to a safer place. Because Uri felt that there were signs of mutants who had approached their place. But the elders rejected it because they felt that it was a very safe place and there was no other place that could replace it. It makes Uri prefer to leave it. But Caleb asks that they can choose their own fate like his father Jared. Yang used to search for the truth outside the forest, but the elders sarcastically told Caleb that it was the way for him to find his death. Uri also agreed with the elders because he also thought that there might not be any survivors out there. There is only disease and death. In the evening Caleb and Miru talk about their father. They think there's a better life out there. It also agreed with Miru, and finally the next day Caleb decided to go further, and when Caleb was on the bank of the river, he saw a group of mutants who were going to his village. This made Caleb quickly return to the village to help the tribe. Eventually the mutants reached the village and attacked them all there so brutally that it ended up making the fight inevitable again. Then those who still survived were immediately evacuated due to the huge number of mutants and were very difficult to defeat. Shafin can only see his father being attacked by mutants and can't do anything about it. The elders immediately ordered to immediately close the cave. Because the mutants would continue to pursue them, eventually everyone followed the order of the elders to immediately enter the cave by leaving Shafin, Doral and Caleb out there. Caleb was overwhelmed by the mutants. But Doral swiftly helped Caleb to fight the mutant, but unfortunately it was not he who was embraced but Shafin who was there. After that the three of them hid behind a large rock. There they saw mutants wandering around the cave in search of a way in. This makes Shafin plan to distract the mutants to stay away from the vicinity of the cave. But Caleb thought that they should go look for reinforcements. Doral agreed, and she also said that staying there was only waiting for death and there would be no hope for all of them. That's why leaving that place and seeking help is a better opportunity than staying there. Finally Shafin followed what Doral suggested and went straight out of the village. Then the three of them went to the river, without realizing that Amal was monitoring them. Meanwhile, Shafin finds a book belonging to Caleb. Then Caleb explained that the book told him that there was an object in the old world that his father had brought with him and that it taught him to read because no one in their tribe could read. But suddenly came mutants from a distance that made them immediately run away. Until they feel safer. But unfortunately the mutant managed to catch up with them, and their Shafin did not want to fight him because he was traumatized after seeing his father killed by the mutants. But luckily Amal came there and instantly killed the mutant there. They immediately get acquainted, and Amal admits that he knows Caleb's father very well. He also asked if they were okay and not bleeding because according to Amal the infection was not only caused by bites but also their breath could transmit and make them mutants. After that Amal invited them to return to his house. On the way Amal explains that he is immune to infection, thanks to a drug that is very difficult to obtain. Finally he invited them all to go to the drug place. Because it's very safe there too. Because apparently the mutants are very afraid of water. And it was also the answer to why the mutants could never get to Amal's house. Finally they arrived at Amal's house in the middle of the forest. There Amal introduced them to his son Perez and his wife Nina. But it turns out that they are very angry with Amal for bringing an infected human into their home. But Amal explained that that was the goal all along. After that, while eating, Amal told what really happened to the mutants. He said that it was a punishment from God because humans had previously tried to revive extinct animals. And without them thinking, it has also revived a disease that they could not cope with. And it turns out that all this happened because Caleb's father had the knowledge to read that allowed him to create this problem and make a powdered medicine, which Amal now uses. Amal explained that the drug does not work immediately but goes through several stages to make the body of the person who uses it immune to infection. But unfortunately Garrett had to die before he could bring the powder to the village. And finally the powder was stolen by an evil man named Kagan. Which ultimately the herb was kept for its own sake. Because of this, Amal wanted to invite them to go to an abandoned place, where the powder was, in the hope that they can find a formula that is hidden, so that Caleb can decipher it. And finally they all agreed to go there. At night, when everyone is asleep, Nina heard a strange noise and decided to immediately lock the door. And it turns out that Caleb also heard the strange sound that made him wake up immediately. And it turned out that the strange sound came from Shafin and Doral, who were making out. It makes Caleb inevitably have to accept the fact. Meanwhile in the village the mutants started looting some weapons and started using them to hit the entrance into the cave. It made Miru think hard to do something. But the elder was pessimistic, saying there was nothing more they could do but pray. But there was a man there who couldn't have seen it all. Then he began to move some small stones behind the cave. But the elders even considered that the activity had gone against God's will. It made Miru say that God should not forbid them to survive. And finally they began to help him to dig again. After that they all managed to make a fairly large hole, which got them together with a man named Yomek. Trying to get through the hole, it turned out that inside there was a small tunnel filled with water and wind. From a gap there, it's very small and makes it very difficult for them to get through. And finally only Miru can get through. There Miru tried to get into the water, but she had to go back immediately when there was a bunch of leeches attached to her body. Then they tried to clean the leech. And after that Miru went back into the water because at that time it was the only thing that could make them escape. On the other side, the elders were watching the mutants, but they did not realize that there was a mutant who slipped a hand to catch them. It made them kill the mutant immediately. But damn the bloody elders, which indicates that he has been infected. On the other hand, Yomek was seen nosebleeds after passing through a water gap. Together with Remy, but their efforts are not in vain after they managed to find a tunnel that leads out. But it was the mutants up there that got them down in such a hurry that they had to fall and break Yomek's leg. Their Yomek refuses to be helped because doing so would only slow them down, which would allow the mutants to capture them all. And finally he decided to return as bait. Meanwhile Miru and Remy immediately escaped through the water gap. And finally the mutants managed to eat Yomek. And straight after Miru and Dan Remy. But luckily the mutants stopped when they saw the water. Now come Miru and Remy in the first cave. There they found a large number of already infected villagers. There the elders ask Remy and Miru for help. Miru refuses to help him. Meanwhile Miru instantly finished him off, before he mutated into a mutant. On the other hand Amal, Caleb, Doral and Safin began to leave his house in search of vaccine powder. But unfortunately, a group of mutants saw them and immediately threw stones at them. But luckily the mutants were very afraid of the water and they all immediately paddled faster until they escaped the mutants. In the middle of the journey, Amal tells his brother who lives in the city that they are all enemies of Kagan. Amal knew a way to call them, and when he got there he tried to light a beacon and see if his brother would come. But unfortunately when he stood on top of the tower, the mutants began to arrive at them and it made Amal immediately ask them to run away. When he went down there, Caleb did not want to leave Amal. But Shafin said that the mutants were too many for them to defeat, and immediately ordered Caleb to return to the raft. After that Amal tried to take refuge in a hole and the mutants continued to attack him. And it got to the point that a mutant went into the hole with him. That made Amal immediately finish him off with an arrow, and now he must be trapped in a hole along with the mutant body on top. On the other side of Shafin, Doral and Caleb boarded a raft to escape immediately. There they see Doral, who starts nosebleeds, and eventually Amal's brother finds and rescues Amal. Then Amal told me that he found someone who could read and had to protect him. Meanwhile the three have arrived at the ruins of the city. It was there they saw people living by very strict rules. There was a man who escaped after being flogged for stealing. That led them to go up to him and ask him some questions about the vaccine powder. But the man did not want to answer because he thought the question was very dangerous for him. And he ran away from there. Then Shafin tried to pursue him. But he had to lose it. Afterwards when Shafin returned, he saw Kalen and Doral, who would be taken away by some guards to meet Kagan and his daughter named Gizel. Finally they meet Kegan. And Kegan said that he didn't want to share the powder. But Kegan tried to explain that he was the son of the creator of the powder. And he also said that only he could read, so he can make more for her. But Kegan still refused to give the book to them. She plans to give the drug to her children and grandchildren in the future. But Kegan finally gave the powder after he saw Doral, who had been dying in an isolation room. After that came Shafin, who sneaked there and tried to talk to Gizel. There Shafin asked Gizel to show him where the powder was stored. But Gizel did not want to help him because he was very afraid of his father. But after Gizel saw her father, who was quite cruel, and found out that he had stolen the powder from an innocent person, Gizel finally wanted to show where the powder was stored. And hope can help other people who are still alive. After that Gizel took Shafin to his father's safe, which could only be opened by a key brought by him. But Shafin did not believe it because there was a lot of dust, which means it hasn't been opened for a long time. It was very different from the words of Gizel, who said that Kagan always took a little powder every day. They scoured several rooms in search of other hiding places, but still did not find anything. Gizel was firmly convinced that the powder had been hidden. And finally it made them start making plans. In the library, Caleb finds his father's formula book. Although he could read it, it also took him weeks to understand and recreate it. But the time will not be enough because she also started nosebleeds due to infection. This led Kagan to say that Caleb would not be able to make it and would never give the powder. But suddenly Gizel came and told his father that someone had entered his room to steal the vaccine powder. This made Kagan immediately go to his room, but there he found none at all. He immediately checked the powder storage, and still in good condition. But it turns out that it was all Gizel's plan for Shafin to know where the boobie was stored. Now Shafin knew that the powder was stored in a flashlight hidden in the wall. Shafin immediately jumped up and it made Kagan drop the powder. But Gizel tries to stop him when Shafin is about to finish him off. After that, Gizel immediately treated Shafin, who began to become infected. And after that they immediately treated Doral. Then they rushed to get away from there by incapacitating several officers. Then Gizel gave a lantern to Shafin and asked him to continue the work of Caleb's father. The two of them then go to the library to rescue Caleb. Eventually, the three of them managed to escape. But when they were on their way, in the bushes there was a guard who shot Shafin using arrows, but eventually Shafin was able to defeat him. In the end they immediately climbed onto the raft, and began rowing all the way to the nearest land. Then they went up the hill and over a very fragile bridge. But things get tough when Ken and his men manage to find them there. Caleb had to be shot by an arrow. Then when they had passed over the bridge, Shafin asked Doral to treat Caleb's foot. Then Shafin went to the bridge to cut the rope to make the guards fall. But must be shot by an arrow he was fired by Kagan to make him fall. On the other hand, Doral and Caleb began to flee until they were finally found by Ahmad and his brother. Finally, they were immediately taken to the village using the horses they brought. It turns out that in the village the mutants are digging an entrance to reach the villagers who are hiding there. It made the brothers Ahmad immediately finished them all. Meanwhile, Doral soon enters Goa, just before Miru commits suicide because she has been infected. After all that, Kagan found them and shot an arrow at Caleb. But luckily Amal immediately jumped up to hold the arrow. Caleb took the axe and threw it to Kagan to kill him. After that, the story moves to a few years later. Caleb is seen coming to Amal's house and saying goodbye to his sister Miru, who is teaching more children to read. Because by reading it will be easier to find clues later. In her film, Caleb said goodbye to go to the city, with the aim to the library again, and will complete his father's work to save humanity. Meanwhile, the city center has been taken over by Ken's daughter, Gizel, which has a mission of good for all the remaining humanity. Then the movie finally ends.